You're throwing away your inheritance on this worthless piece of dirt. My brother Michael's voice echoed through the empty wine cellar, dripping with disdain. I always knew you were naive, Emma, but this is a new level of stupid. I ran my hand along the dusty stone walls, feeling the deep grooves where generations of my family had carved their initials. Grandfather's vineyard might have looked abandoned now, but I could still feel its soul beneath the decay. The land's been dead for 20 years, Michael continued, kicking an old barrel. The vines are worthless. The soil's ruined. Even the equipment is ancient. What exactly do you think you're going to accomplish here? I turned to face him, standing my ground in the dim cellar light. This place meant everything to Grandpa. He wouldn't have let it die without a reason. Michael laughed, a sound harsh against the stone walls. The reason is simple. He went senile in his old age. Destroyed his own vineyard, ruined the family's wine business, and died leaving nothing but debt and dead vines. And now you're using your part of the inheritance to buy this disaster. I thought about the meeting I just had with the family lawyer. While Michael and our sister Olivia had chosen to take their inheritance in cash, I'd opted to buy out their shares of Grandfather's vineyard. They'd been almost gleeful about it, thinking I was being sentimental and foolish. At least I'm trying to preserve something of Grandpa's legacy, I said quietly. Legacy, Michael sneered. His legacy was destroying everything our family built. This vineyard produced some of the finest wines in Napa Valley for 3 generations. Then in his last years, Grandpa just lost it. Started babbling about special preparations, secret methods. He fired all the workers, stopped maintaining the vines, locked himself away in the cellar for days at a time. I remembered those final years. I was the only one who still visited regularly, bringing Grandpa groceries, sitting with him while he worked in his cellar. He'd always been lucid with me, even if his methods seemed strange. There's more to this place than you know, he told me repeatedly. When the time is right, you'll understand. You could have invested your inheritance, Michael continued. Joined Olivia and me in the tech startup we're planning. Instead, you're throwing it all away on 30 acres of dead vines and a crumbling mansion. I didn't bother telling him that I had already found several antique wine bottles in the cellar that were worth more than what I'd paid for the entire property. Grandfather had been many things, but careless with truly valuable wine wasn't one of them. You've made your opinion clear, I said, moving toward the cellar steps. Was there anything else you needed? He shook his head, following me up to the main floor. Just trying to talk some sense into you one last time. But clearly, you're determined to follow in Grandpa's footsteps, right into bankruptcy. As Michael's expensive car kicked up dust leaving the property, I stood on the mansion's wraparound porch, surveying my new domain. The November sun cast long shadows across the overgrown vineyard, painting the neglected vines in shades of gold and amber. To an outsider, it might have looked abandoned, even haunted, but I saw potential. The grand Victorian mansion needed work, but its bones were solid. The equipment in the winery building was outdated but maintained. Grandpa had always been meticulous about machinery, and the vines, everyone assumed they were dead because they hadn't produced grapes in years. But I'd studied viticulture in college before the family pressured me into getting a practical business degree. These vines weren't dead. They were dormant. I went back down to the cellar, this time with purpose. Over the past few years, I'd watched Grandpa disappear down here for hours, sometimes days. He'd never let anyone follow him into the deepest parts of the cellar's maze-like corridors. Family secrets, he'd said with a wink, waiting for the right person to discover them. The main cellar was impressive enough, row upon row of bottles, some dating back a century or more. But I knew there had to be more. Grandpa wouldn't have spent his final years down here for no reason. I began examining the walls systematically, looking for anything unusual. Near the back of the main cellar, behind a rack of dusty bottles, I found it, a slight irregularity in the stone pattern. Pressing my hand against it, I felt a subtle click. A section of wall swung inward silently, revealing a narrow corridor. My heart pounding, I pulled out my phone's flashlight and stepped through. The passage curved gently downward, the air growing cooler. After about 30 feet, it opened into a chamber that took my breath away. The room was circular, its walls lined with ancient-looking wine racks. But what caught my eye was the massive wooden table in the center, covered with leather-bound journals, old maps, and what appeared to be scientific equipment. I approached the table slowly, my flashlight beam dancing across its surface. The journals were handwritten, some in Grandpa's familiar scrawl, others in different hands dating back generations. As I began to read, my hands trembled. These weren't just notes about winemaking. They were formulas, experimental data, detailed observations about soil composition and grape mutations. My family had always prided themselves on producing exceptional wine. But this was something else entirely. A particular journal entry caught my eye, dated just months before Grandpa's death. The experiment is finally complete. 3 generations of work, culminating in something extraordinary. The vines are ready, though they appear dead to unknowing eyes. The soil has been perfectly prepared. All that remains is for the right person to awaken them. Everything they need to know is here, if they have the wisdom to understand it. I sat down heavily in an ancient wooden chair, my mind racing. The family had thought Grandpa was losing his grip on reality in those final years. But he hadn't been destroying the vineyard, he'd been transforming it. My phone buzzed, making me jump. A text from Michael. Last chance to back out of this foolish purchase. Documents need to be signed tomorrow. I smiled, looking around the secret chamber that held the real treasure of our family's legacy. No backing out, I typed back. I know exactly what I'm doing. As I explored further, I found more journals, more equipment, and something that made my heart stop. A small refrigerated room, humming quietly, powered by what looked like a sophisticated solar system. Inside were dozens of carefully labeled glass vials containing what appeared to be specialized yeast strains and grape specimens. Another journal entry explained, the traditional Cabernet Sauvignon grape is merely a canvas. Through careful breeding and genetic selection, we've created something unique, a grape variety that will produce wine unlike anything the world has ever tasted, but it requires perfect conditions, perfect timing. The vines must appear dead for years while the root system develops. The soil must be allowed to transform. Patience is everything. I remembered how the family had ridiculed Grandpa for letting the vineyard fall into apparent ruin. They called him senile when he talked about special preparations and secret methods. But he'd been orchestrating something remarkable. More exploration revealed a sophisticated soil monitoring system, with sensors throughout the vineyard feeding data to computers hidden in this secret cellar. According to the readouts, everything was exactly where it needed to be. The soil composition was perfect. The root systems were fully developed. The vines weren't dead. They were ready to wake up. Another journal entry, this one written in my great-grandfather's hand, caught my attention. The Morrison family has always been known for exceptional wine. But what we're creating here goes beyond exceptional. It will revolutionize the industry. But it requires absolute secrecy, absolute patience, and above all, the right person to bring it to fruition. I thought about Michael and Olivia, so quick to take their cash inheritance and run. They saw only the surface, the overgrown vines, the neglected mansion, the apparently worthless land. But Grandpa had seen something in me, had guided me here, knowing I would understand. My phone buzzed again. Olivia this time. Michael says you're really going through with this. You're making a huge mistake. I looked around the secret chamber, at the decades of research, at the carefully preserved specimens, at the sophisticated monitoring equipment tracking every aspect of the vineyard's transformation. Then I typed back, no, I'm finally doing something right. Tomorrow I would sign the papers and take full ownership of the vineyard. My family thought I was buying 30 acres of dead vines and a crumbling mansion. They had no idea I was actually taking possession of 3 generations of revolutionary research and a perfectly engineered vineyard on the verge of producing something extraordinary. I spent hours reading through the journals, my mind spinning with the implications of what my family had been secretly developing. The formulas, the genetic research, the carefully controlled conditions, it was brilliant. Grandpa hadn't gone senile. He'd been a genius completing his life's work. As night fell, I finally emerged from the secret cellar, carefully sealing the hidden entrance behind me. Standing on the mansion's porch, I looked out over the vineyard in the gathering darkness. To everyone else, it looked dead and worthless. But I knew better. In a few months, when conditions were perfect, those seemingly dead vines would come back to life. And when they did, they would produce something that would change everything. I smiled, thinking of Michael's condescending sneer, Olivia's dismissive texts, and all the family members who thought I was throwing my inheritance away on a worthless piece of land. They had no idea what was coming. Sometimes the greatest opportunities are the ones everyone else is too blind to see. Tomorrow, I would begin preparing for the vineyard's awakening. But for now, I sat on the porch of my new home, watching the stars come out over the sleeping vines, and raised a glass of one of Grandpa's special vintages. Thank you for trusting me with your legacy, I whispered to the night air. I won't let you down. In the distance, a coyote howled, and a warm breeze rustled through the dormant vineyard. Change was coming, and I would be ready when it arrived. Spring came to the valley like a slow-burning miracle. While other vineyards burst into life with their first buds, my vines remained apparently lifeless. The local wine community whispered about the crazy Morrison girl, living alone in that old mansion, tending to dead vines. I ignored them all, following Grandpa's meticulous instructions. Each day, I checked the soil sensors, monitored the temperature and humidity in the secret cellar, and prepared for what I knew was coming. Then, one morning in late April, everything changed. I was reviewing the sensor data over my morning coffee when an alert flashed on the monitoring system. Soil conditions had reached optimal levels. Temperature, moisture, mineral content, everything was perfectly aligned. It was time. Following the instructions in Grandpa's journals, I began the awakening process. The specialized yeast strains were carefully introduced to the soil. The dormant vines were treated with the unique nutrient solution he developed. Then came the waiting. 3 days later, I stood in the pre-dawn light, staring in awe at my vineyard. Where yesterday there had been seemingly dead vines, today there was an explosion of life. Bright green shoots burst from the ancient wood, unfurling with impossible speed. The transformation was so dramatic that several cars pulled over on the nearby road, their drivers gawking at the overnight miracle. My phone started ringing almost immediately. First was Michael. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded without preamble. "I just drove past the vineyard. Those vines were dead yesterday." "Apparently not," I replied calmly, watching another cluster of buds emerge. "This is impossible," he sputtered. "You must have planted new vines overnight or something. Feel free to come check for yourself. These are the same vines that have been here for generations. They were just sleeping." He hung up without another word. Within hours, the local wine community was buzzing with speculation. News crews showed up at my gate, wanting to know how dead vines had sprung to life overnight. I gave no interviews, just as Grandpa's journals had advised. "Let them wonder," he'd written. "The wine will speak for itself." And what wine it would be. As the vines continued their extraordinary growth, I studied the analysis Grandpa had documented. The grape variety they developed wasn't just unique, it was revolutionary. Through decades of careful breeding and genetic selection, my family had created something that combined the best qualities of multiple varieties while introducing entirely new characteristics. The first grapes appeared in mid-June, 2 months ahead of normal growing seasons. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Larger than typical wine grapes, with an iridescent purple sheen to their skin. The leaves, too, were different, with a distinctive pattern that no other variety possessed. Word spread through the valley. Other vineyard owners started showing up, offering astronomical sums to buy cuttings or learn our secrets. I turned them all away. Then came the day I'd been dreading. A sleek black Tesla pulled up to my gate, and out stepped Michael and Olivia, along with our family's longtime lawyer. "We need to talk," Michael announced as I met them on the porch, "about our shares in the vineyard." I led them into the living room, which had restored to its former glory. Olivia looked around with poorly concealed envy at the antique furniture I'd uncovered in the mansion's attic. "You signed away your rights to the vineyard," I reminded them, sitting in Grandpa's favorite leather chair. The papers were quite clear. "We signed those papers when this place was worthless," Michael countered. "You clearly knew something we didn't. That makes the contract fraudulent." I laughed softly. "I knew exactly what you knew. Grandpa left this place to all of us equally. You chose cash over the vineyard." "I chose to believe in his vision." "His vision?" Olivia scoffed. "He was losing his mind at the end. Everyone knew that." I stood up, my patience finally wearing thin. "Really? The man who created an entirely new grape variety? Who developed a revolutionary cultivation method? Who built a sophisticated monitoring system that would make Silicon Valley jealous? That's the man you thought was losing his mind." Their faces paled. "What are you talking about?" Michael demanded. "Follow me," I said, leading them down to the cellar. When I opened the secret door, their shock was almost comical. As we entered the hidden chamber, Michael stumbled back against a wall while Olivia let out a small scream. "What is all this?" the lawyer whispered, staring at the journals, the equipment, the carefully preserved specimens. "This," I said, "is 3 generations of our family's real legacy." While everyone thought they were just making good wine, they were actually developing something revolutionary. Grandpa completed the work, but he needed someone patient enough, observant enough, to find this place and understand what to do with it. "And he chose you?" Michael's voice was bitter. "The little sister who went to wine school." "He didn't choose me," I corrected him. "He left it to all of us equally. You chose not to see the potential here. You chose to mock his life's work and grab quick cash. Those were your choices." "We'll sue," Olivia threatened. "We'll tell everyone about this secret lab, these experiments." "Go ahead," I smiled. "Tell them about how you sold your shares in what will soon be the most valuable vineyard in America because you thought it was worthless. Tell them how you mocked our grandfather's genius because you were too impatient to understand it. I'm sure the media will love that story." They left shortly after, their threats diminishing to quiet pleas for a second chance. I turned them down gently but firmly. Some choices, once made, can't be unmade. The first harvest came in August. The grapes were perfect, exactly as Grandpa had described in his journals. Following his detailed instructions, I began the fermentation process using the specialized yeast strains he preserved. The first bottles were ready for tasting in November, 1 year after I'd taken ownership of the vineyard. I invited the Valley's top wine critics for a private tasting, swearing them to secrecy until the official release. Their reactions exceeded even my expectations. "Impossible," one veteran critic whispered, tears in his eyes. "Wine can't taste like this." Another simply sat in stunned silence, staring at his glass as if it held the secrets of the universe. The official reviews, when they came out, were unprecedented. Perfect scores across the board. Words like revolutionary and transcendent appeared repeatedly. One critic wrote, "This isn't just a new wine, it's an entirely new category of wine. The Morrison Vineyard has changed the game forever." Orders started pouring in from around the world. Luxury retailers, 5-star restaurants, private collectors, all willing to pay astronomical prices for what was already being called the wine of the century. I received a letter from Michael and Olivia's lawyer, offering to buy back into the vineyard at 10 times what they'd sold for. I sent back a bottle of the new vintage with a note, "Some opportunities only come once." A year later, I stood on the mansion's porch, watching the sun set over my thriving vineyard. The vines were heavy with another perfect harvest. The winery had been modernized, though I kept all of Grandpa's original equipment preserved in a special display. The secret cellar was still secret, but I'd begun documenting everything for the next generation. Someday, another Morrison would need to understand the legacy they were inheriting. My phone buzzed, another text from Michael. They'd started their own vineyard, trying to replicate our success. But without the generations of research, the specialized grapes, the perfect conditions, they were just making ordinary wine. I thought about Grandpa's words, written in his final journal entry. "Success, like fine wine, requires patience. The world is full of people looking for quick rewards. But the greatest achievements come to those who can see the potential in what others dismiss as worthless." The Morrison Vineyard was now the most famous name in wine. Our bottles sold for thousands of dollars each, with waiting lists years long. But sitting there on the porch, sipping a glass of our miracle wine, I knew the real treasure wasn't the money or the fame. It was the legacy of 3 generations of visionaries, working in secret, believing in something everyone else thought was impossible. It was the patience to wait for dormant vines to awaken. It was the courage to see value in what others called worthless. I raised my glass to the setting sun, to the thriving vineyard, and most of all, to the grandfather who trusted me to understand what everyone else had missed. Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone patient enough to discover them. And sometimes the things people call worthless turn out to be priceless if you just have the wisdom to see what others can't. As night fell over the vineyard, I could almost hear Grandpa's laugh in the evening breeze. He'd known, all along, that his legacy wasn't dead. It was just waiting for the right moment to come back to life. And thanks to a granddaughter who believed in worthless things, that legacy would now live forever.